Um, so let's the first area I'd like to give your thoughts on is if you're approached by an applicant or objector early on in the application process and asked for your support, how do you tend to respond?
It all depends, for my money, on whether or not the application is within the ward I represent. So if we can start with that scenario,
Yeah.
if my constituents come to me and say we've got something bubbling, an application has been submitted and we don't like it, we're worried, there's a lot of opposition, I will have to make excuse me, I'll have to make a decision very, very quickly about whether I'm going to maintain my position as a member of the planning committee and all the restrictions that that places on me, or for that item I'm going to step away from my planning committee membership and put a more political hat on and join the constituents in opposing it. And that obviously means that one can be as subjective and as politically biased as the situation allows. It also may be the case that I might want to support the application and be subjective in my my liking for the proposal. That's always a political decision to make. It might well be that one is up for election, that you represent a marginal ward, and to put it absolutely bluntly, you don't want to annoy the sort of voters who get interested in issues and might vote accordingly. And that goes with the political territory. Any councillor worth their salt will understand that. If that happens, then I would make it clear very, very early on to the planning team, the officers, that that's what I'm doing, that any communication I make about that application is done as a ward councillor with an awful lot of subjectivity, either for or against. Let's be honest, it would normally be against. And I would want to make that clear to the local residents, to explain what I'm sure most people watching this will get straight away, but to say to them, for this item only, I can comment, I can support you, I can join in the petition gathering and holding the placards and whatever it might be. We also get contacted by people about larger, more strategic planning applications, which will affect not just one ward, but in our case, the city as a whole, the planning authority area as a whole. And they're not coming to you specifically, they're coming to you just as a member of the planning committee. So my normal response is just to send a very polite thank you very much, your comments are noted type of acknowledgement, and then just prepare myself for what we get presented with on the day. It's interesting to read what people have to say, of course it is, but I think you have to take everything like that with a pinch of salt. People aren't contacting you because they're neutral. People are contacting you because they want something to be approved or rejected, if it's an applicant or a pressure group or whatever it might be. So I think it's about understanding where you are in the process. Why are people getting in touch with me? Not everything I'm reading might be objectively true, and wait until the planning committee to hear the whole range of arguments and facts for and against. And I think if you have that at the forefront of your mind, you can't go far wrong.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Adele.
Yeah, I mean, I broadly agree with the points that Bill has just made there. In terms of ward applications, I mean, I've got 2 ward colleagues, so I generally let them get involved in planning decisions from the start. Particularly, the controversial ones, and a lot of them are controversial in my ward because a lot of them are big applications. So I let them get involved and support the residents, and they're the ones who appear at committee. I will make it very clear that I completely stay neutral, and actually my residents understand that. They understand that if they want to have me on the planning committee making the decision in an impartial way, I need to not have got drawn into any kind of comments publicly about an application, and they see the value of having me on the committee, that I have that extra bit of local knowledge that sometimes sometimes hasn't been picked up by the planning officers or the applicants even. In terms of exhibitions with developers or pre-applications or pre-meets, sometimes I'll go to those exhibitions if I'm going to be on the committee, but I never ever give my view. And it's always better actually if you do anything like that with an officer present. If you're going to sit on the committee, then definitely. We did used to, our strategic planning application for the big developments did used to have pre-app presentations from developers or from applicants. We stopped doing that, which is a shame, I think, because that for the planning committee was a great help to, because we would have the officers in the room, we would have all of the planning committee in the room, and we wouldn't be giving our views, but it would be an opportunity for us all to have a presentation, a clear presentation from the applicants. Similarly to Bill, if objectors write to me as a committee member, or anybody tries to lobby me, or indeed if developers try and lobby me as a committee member, I will say thank you very much, noted, and take everything into consideration and not give a view. Yeah, I think that sort of covers for both of us. Oh, occasionally there is something in my ward, again similarly to Bill, that I will say I do want to get involved in this for whatever reason, and in that situation always absent myself from the committee, any kind of decision making.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the second area then, if there's a large public presence in the committee meeting and they're interested in a particular application, do you feel added pressures when it comes to speaking and voting? And do you approach your contributions to the debate and decision making differently when there are large public presence?
Yeah, undoubtedly. When you get people who have, they've got a petition going, they've managed to rally around support from all over the place, and then they turn up en masse in the public gallery, then it does put a lot of pressure on the members of the committee. I think it's really important to try and keep focused on the planning merits of the scheme, and any sort of issues that they're raising. I will confess that I do take part in a certain amount of theatre, political theatre, with a small p, theatre in that respect. And sometimes, when the objectors have made some very convincing presentations, you need to kind of ask the officers the questions afterwards and just make sure, excuse me, that it's clear to those people in the room that you have really sort of considered everything in the round about that application. And really that's because if you don't do that, you just get a reputation for rubber stamping everything. And obviously there's no point in having members on a planning committee if all you do is rubber stamp officer decisions. That's not what you're there for. You're there to bring a slightly different perspective to the decision making, and potentially, if necessary, to weigh things in a different way to the way officers weighed them. But essentially, that you're using the sort of material planning considerations to make your decision, but you can kind of play to the crowd a little bit just so that they feel that they've been involved. One of the things that has started to happen lately, though, I've noticed, is that there are a lot of planning professionals who are appearing as objectors at committee, or even community groups who are able to employ planning professionals to speak for them. And obviously the applicants always have their professional advisors, and they will always tell you why the objections are not relevant, etc. In those cases, I think it's really important that you check back in with your planning officers and your legal officers after you've heard everything, just to say, they've raised this point, they say that is a material consideration, and they've referred to policy X in our plan. What do you think? Because, again, it's very easy, I think, to get swayed by somebody presenting some evidence which seems very compelling. So in terms of voting, I will only vote against something or propose a motion to refuse if I'm absolutely confident that I can say, these are my reasons for refusal. Not necessarily to be able to quote policy 3.2 of the local plan or the London plan or whatever, although sometimes I can. But you're not expected to do that. But seriously, you've got to, if you are going to take notice of what's being said by your objectors and your applicants, you must be able to relate it back, and you mustn't be voting against something just because you feel uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you, Adele. Bill.
Yeah, I mean, Adele's right. It would be a very, very strange councillor indeed who didn't feel pressure in a meeting of the sort that your question described. We all, to a large extent, thrive on the audience, the political audience, and the theatre, and people reacting either positively or negatively to what you say. I mean, that's part of the political territory. You can't get away from that. But I think you've also got to feel secure in the processes that your planning committee has. Planning committee meetings are meetings held in public as opposed to public meetings. They're there so that the watching public, whether they're in favour of an application or against it, can see that it's decided and debated properly, and you're not there to be swayed by the gallery. I always say to people, it's not the X factor. It's not who can get most public votes for an application or against one. Otherwise, it would be a simple, crude referendum, and certainly our planning system is a million miles away from that, thankfully. There will inevitably be political pressure, party political pressure, not necessarily enacted by, or I hope by, the party itself. There's certainly, in nearly 20 years, I've never seen any evidence of the Labour line on this is such and such, or the Liberal Democrat line is this, or we expect Conservative councillors to vote this way. I've never known anything like that. But going back to the previous point, it might be that something is happening in a ward that your party is in danger of losing, or a ward that your party is hoping to gain at the next election, and a planning decision going one way or the other may well sway some voters to vote one way or a different way, which could do your party great harm or potential damage. You've really got to be able to rise above that and not be swayed. People can spot it a mile off, a lot of councillors think they can be clever and, well, I'll say I'm voting on material planning grounds, but really it's because I don't want us to lose such and such a ward because of whatever. People can see that, officers can see that, the voters can see that, and planning lawyers can see that a mile off. So please don't get drawn into that. The processes are built to protect you and to protect councillors from doing the wrong thing. So so use that and trust the procedures that we've got. Don't be swayed by emotion, as Adele quite rightly says. You will hear a lot of emotion on all sides, but bear in mind, no public speaker comes to a planning committee because they're neutral. No applicant is going to give you a totally unbiased view, and no objector is going to give you a totally unbiased view. They're there because they have an interest in it. Either they want a deal to go through, or they want to preserve their local park, or not have something built overlooking their garden, or whatever it is. So take everything with huge pinches of salt. The officers that you employ are there to give you the unbiased, neutral account. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but that's the road you have to go down in terms of your decision making. And you've got to remember that we are the public face of our local authority. It might, apart from voting and paying a council tax, going to a planning committee might be the only real interaction someone has with their local authority throughout the course of their life. And you must maintain a professional demeanor, make sure it looks trustworthy, it looks like people know what they're doing, like there is mutual respect between the decision maker and the professional officer. And that's how you, at the end of the day, get safe decisions. That's how you get decisions that will stand up to appeal, to trust the processes, to not feel you. Of course, you're going to get blown a little bit in the wind in one way or the other, but don't break in the wind. Make sure that you can say to yourself, yes, I listened, I heard what everyone had to say for it and against it, but my decision was based purely on the facts. Doesn't mean that that's necessarily the same recommendation that the officers came forward with, but if you can say, I did the right thing, then you'll have done your job.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
Could I just add something that I forgot to say, which is something that I will often say at the end of a meeting when I'm voting in favour, particularly if they have, if we've had very, very strong opposition. When they go down and do the kind of, individual members, what are your thoughts on this? I will often say, I realise there's a lot of anxiety about this development. I personally don't like it. It's not the development I would like to have seen before us, but actually this is what's before us, and I can't find any policy reasons for refusal. And on that basis, I have to vote in favour, even though I don't personally like the development or I take on board. So sometimes, I will just explain why I'm voting in favour of something that's had clear opposition, and people seem to be happy with that.
A lot of these issues can be avoided if there's proper explanation given to the public by the local authority and councillors, and not just planning committee members, because you may never be on a planning committee at all in your council service, but that's no guarantee you won't get the most controversial item coming in the ward that you represent. And I always think it's incumbent to explain these processes, to explain what the restrictions are, because the number of people who think that I don't like it is a material planning ground. And you can't blame them, because if you're never told anything different, that's a natural reaction, especially if they want to put something very unpopular just down the road from you. And that education, that explaining things in the meantime is so important, and it cuts out all this. Well, we've got a petition signed by 10,000 people. Of course, you're going to vote against it, aren't you? I always say to my constituents that one letter giving a solid gold nugget of a material planning consideration is worth a petition with 1 million signatures on saying no, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, both. That's really very interesting. Now, finally, Bill, as a venerable planning committee member with sound judgment, what is your single piece of advice to your peers across the country aspiring to be the best planning committee member they can be?
If I can be cheeky and break it down into two separate but I think related bits, I would first of all say don't be in awe of the process. We as councillors have all the training, we live in a world of jargon and what seems like incomprehensible technobabble a lot of the time, dealing with officers such as yourselves who've got more planning qualifications as a professional than I ever will. But I would say to councillors, you are the process. You are the decision makers, and make sure you enjoy the process. Make sure you enjoy, as Adele said, the theatre. Make sure you enjoy the responsibility of taking decisions that will shape your city, your borough for years and years and decades after you've gone. That's a huge responsibility. You can either buckle under that responsibility because it's just too much to cope with, or you can lap it up and relish it and think, you know what, I'm going to have my say here. I'm going to make sure that this plan we've got is implemented properly. And that might be different from officers, it might be different from the councillor sat next to you, but that's a huge, huge opportunity you've got to shape your neighbourhood and your city and your borough and your town. So grab it.
Okay, thank you very much both. That's been really, really useful, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.